Welcome back to the 1662 Fellowship of North America, where we promote the historic Anglican formularies as the theological center of gravity for Orthodox Anglicanism in North America. I'm Isaac Rayberg, the Archdeacon for Liturgy in the Anglican Diocese of All Nations and the Rector of All Saints Anglican Church in San Antonio, Texas. Today we have part 4 of my interview with Bishop Peter Robinson. We're going to discuss how high churchmanship evolves into central churchmanship as the Tractarians ascend, and we're going to discuss liturgical revision and ecumenism in the 19th and 20th centuries. So this is some fun historical stuff, as always, with Bishop Robinson. And I do apologize for the video quality in this series. Apparently, it was a bad Zoom day, and I didn't want to redo the whole interview. So please bear with us, and I guarantee you in the next series, the video quality will be much better, so don't go away. And we resume then with Bishop Peter Robinson.
You see, one of the problems you have, speaking of mining, one of the problems you have with the relationship between the old High Churchmen and the Tractarians is the Tractarians are absolute terrors for mining the Caroline divines.
Right.
And they will take the most extreme statements of people like John Cosin or George Bull and hang whole theories off them, where if you read a little bit further, say in John Cosin, you'll find that the remark he made about seemingly an objective real presence is actually to be read in the context of him laying out what is, to all intents and purposes, John Calvin's spiritual presence.
Mm-hmm.
The later Tractarian writing can be very misleading about what the old High Churchmen actually believed.
I think about and certainly this is fiction, but the depiction in the Barchester Chronicles, these are very much High Churchmen, but they have no sympathy for the followers of Pusey.
That's right. And you see, that would have been the situation in an awful lot of England in the 1850s when Anthony Trollope was writing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a period when the old High Churchmen are still a major force in the hierarchy of the Church of England.
Is it about the turn of the 20th that they're pretty much gone? Is that about the time, or are they how long does that hang out?
They sort of they don't really disappear. They lose cohesion. They cease to be a party, and they really become what we described in England as central churchmanship, which is a sort of, it's a middle of the road Anglicanism that's conscious of the basic documents. We have an episcopal system of government. The early church had bishops, therefore we have bishops. It's conscious of the 39 articles, but it doesn't worry about where the punctuation is. And it uses the prayer book. And it's basically just plain old parish church religion.
And we've got the foundations for what we do as a church. We've always done it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mess with what ain't broke.
And it gradually adopts elements from the Tractarian program. So they eventually start lighting the candles on the communion table. They eventually start calling the communion table an altar. They eventually start wearing a stole for Holy Communion.
Mm-hmm.
But there's kind of a distinct lag. It's as these things become non-controversial, they're accepted into central churchmanship practice. And the central churchmanship, when you read people who are kind of a central churchmanship perspective, like Denton Thompson, who wrote a funny little book called The Central Churchman, as you're reading through it, what you realize is most of their thinking is really just a pragmatic adaptation of the old high church position.
Hmm.
They believe Christ is present in the Eucharist, but they define it spiritually.
Hmm.
Some sort of change, some sort of regeneration occurs in baptism, but they're defining it in terms which sound a lot more like Daniel Waterland than some of the more, you know, tridentine positions taken by the ritualists.
You're not going to get any ex opere operato going on.
Oh no. Um, and you see, that leads into, in a funny sort of way, the importance of the liturgy to the central tradition of the church and to the old high churchmen before them, because the liturgy is the collective memory.
And you
How
wrote a
we
piece on that recently for North American Anglican,
Mhm.
and people were very surprised that you were okay with liturgical revision, just maybe not the way we've done it.
Right. The trouble with liturgical revision tends to be what's happening now tends to form the revision.
Yeah.
So the 1928 prayer book is very much influenced by the liberalism and the liberal Anglo Catholicism that was very prevalent in the 20s.
The prayer for social justice is was one of those that seems pretty odd. That's so very 1920s.
Yes. The prayer for the League of Nations, I always think, is a classic on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, it has that kind of slightly. The 1928 prayer book, actually, like all of the American prayer books, has a slightly liberal vibe in the context of the period it was written.
Hmm.
The one, strangely, that is the least quote unquote liberal is 1892.
And I remember Perry's history on the Episcopal Church. He kind of complained about the 1892. If I'm getting this, I may be misremembering who wrote it, but I remember a right around the turn of the 19th century, rather, turn of the 20th century, rather, complaining that 1892 just didn't go far enough.
That's probably a good thing.
I agree.
When you look at the butchery that was done to the baptism service in 1928, the flood prayer, which had been there since 1549, gets the heave ho.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's such a tragedy right there.
You begin to wonder what was, the thought process was. The other thing that always amazes me about the American prayer book is it has a bit of a propensity for doing the right thing the wrong way.
Well,
So,
like for example,
the classic is that extremely vague commemoration of the faithful departed.
in the communion prayers for the people.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, they should have gone back to 1549 on that,
Right,
or at least lifted the Scottish version.
right.
And of course, the invocation is a mess.
It's not really an epiclesis, but they're trying to make it a bit of an epiclesis, and yeah,
Yeah, and it's neither an orthodox epiclesis nor a reformed epiclesis.
right, right.
It tries to, eat its cake and have it.
Yeah.
So that's why I say, and of course, I've growing up on the 1662 for morning and evening prayer. I have my moments with morning and evening prayer in the American prayer books,
Hmm.
because there's some rather sort of strange scissors and paste. But on the other hand, right now, given the fractured state of Anglicanism, it's not really an opportune moment to embark on a revision.
Yeah, and it seems that oftentimes when folks want to revise are not good times to do so.
Yes. But I think the other reason I defined it in terms of liturgy rather than the Book of Common Prayer
Hmm.
is that if you actually look at some of the other liturgical Protestant churches, their liturgies maintain a doctrinal position. I'm going to have to step through the next statement uh, like I'm going through a field of man traps. That are not incompatible with the 39 articles. And you see, this brings me back by a strange route to the whole Jerusalem bishopric mystery.
Hmm.
Um, the Jerusalem bishopric is often seen by 20th century church historians as being an aberration. But if you look at it in the context of the priorities of um, the Prussian administration under Friedrich Wilhelm IV, the old high churchmen, and the English evangelical elite, it makes perfect sense. Friedrich Wilhelm IV wanted to act as protector of the Protestants in the Holy Land.
Right.
But he could only do that by internationalizing the project, which meant getting the English involved.
And some of that's because of the Ottomans and their restrictions as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Yes.
remember, I don't remember which church, but one of the churches there only got built because the local bishop said, well, this is just my private chapel, but it really
Mm-hmm.
was for missions.
Then Friedrich Wilhelm IV was trying to back channel episcopacy into the Prussian Union Church.
Okay.
The English evangelicals were looking for a secure base for mission work amongst the Jews.
Yeah, it's CMJ, Christchurch, and those types of things.
Yeah. And also something that would reinforce the Protestant credentials of the Church of England. And of course, with the Prussian Union Church being Lutheran, Union, and Reformed, that sort of broad Protestantism was acceptable to the English bishops.
Hmm.
What is noticeable about the Jerusalem bishopric is it is not pushed forward by the liberal element on the episcopal bench, but by three high churchmen.
Interesting.
William Hooley, the Archbishop of Canterbury, um, Edward Harcourt, the Archbishop of York, and C.J. Bloomfield, the Bishop of London. All three of whom had connections with the Hackney Phalanx.
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize that. That's pretty fascinating.
So you've got this strange combination of the old high churchmen, the British evangelical establishment, and the Prussian monarchy all working together on this thing. And then when you actually look at the liturgy that came out of the Prussian Union, it is quite traditional.
Hmm.
Isn't totally traditional, which is why the Lutherans flipped out about it. But, it runs in the order very familiar to, from modern liturgies today. General confession, Kyrie, Gloria, collect, epistle, gospel, creed, sermon, prayer for the people. Gets a little hazy after that, but when eventually it gets sorted out, the Eucharist proceeds in a shape that we would be familiar with.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
and it's authorized alongside, or a version of it is authorized alongside the Book of Common Prayer for use in the Jerusalem bishopric.
Was that at all controversial back home in England at that time, or nobody really had a problem with that?
The only people who were screaming about it were the Tractarians,
and that's because they didn't consider the Union folks legitimate church without
right?
already having had bishops. Yeah,
Right. There is an anti-ecumenical stance to the Tractarians, which form the basis, in a funny sort of a way, to their opposition to the Jerusalem bishopric. The other part of that is that there was a feeling on their part that they were setting up altar against altar.
mm-hmm.
They weren't recognizing the existing Orthodox and churches of the East. And every now and again, I sort of have this feeling the Tractarians had a very weird idea of Catholicism.
Well, I remember. Oh gosh, whose works was it? Uh, Bishop Grafton, I think it was his works. I read not too a couple of years ago when the Shoda House republished them, and Grafton was very anti-Roman Catholic, and some of that was in the wake of at that time the recent dogmas, but he was so very in love with the East. I mean, we have Grafton and Tikhon, their attempts at kind of grassroots ecumenism, but yeah, there's some very interesting things in there, and Grafton's not real friendly with other Protestants either. I mean, he
No.
kind of sees them all as pretty schismatic. Now, Grafton's not Tractarian; he's a couple generations later, but
yeah.
It was interesting to me to watch that very anti-Roman Catholic, and yet we see that there was a lot of taking cues from that world by the 1920s Anglo-Catholicism.
The other thing I find rather interesting is the Episcopal missions amongst the Scandinavians in Minnesota, Wisconsin, UP, Michigan, demise about the time the Church of England starts negotiating seriously with the Church of Sweden. It's almost as though the high church bishops in America are sort of working against the rapprochement that's being attempted by the Church of England.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, I know that kind of American Lutheranism is a little weird in its mix and match approach to ecclesiology. And I think that's because they were all immigrant communities from places that had different ecclesiology. But that is very weird that the mission would get really big there.
The other thing that's going on to a certain extent is that the reason there were Episcopal missions using quasi-Lutheran liturgies was because some of the Swedes would rather be under an Episcopal bishop and retain episcopacy than get drawn into the more congregational world of American Lutheranism. Because a lot of the 19th century history of Lutheranism in America is working out what it means to be an American Lutheran.
Because of that melting pot from Germany and all the Scandinavian areas.
Yeah. And you see, right up until the 1960s, generally, even the unions amongst the Lutherans took place within the ethnic group.
Oh yeah, First Presbyterian First Protestant Church. That's what it's First Protestant Church in a little German town, just a few minutes drive north of us. They were still New Braunfels. That's right. they were still. I lived in New Braunfels around the time I was getting ordained, so I
Hmm.
love that town. But they were still speaking German there within living memory.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when
Some,
I was born, they were still speaking German over there.
yeah, some of the RCU US churches that I deal with down in North Carolina, they did not drop German until between the wars.
Mhm.
And that's a community that have been there since the 1750s, the 1760s.
Wow.
Now, on the other hand, um, the Lutheran Church here dropped German in 1837, which is roughly 65 years after they were founded.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. We'll go ahead and end right there, and we will resume next week with the final part of my interview with Bishop Robinson. As always, God bless you. Thank you for watching or listening. And this is Isaac Rayberg and the 1662 Fellowship of North America.